Look, I know these aren't the games everyone gets excited about and is the one you've got earmarked on the calendar, and that many fans would rather just see off the schedule. Although I would note, I actually despise week one games versus FCS more than the SoCon Saturday the SEC does late in the season. I think that's actually more beneficial, but we can set that aside for another day. But one of my favorite things I like to do in the offseason is a little Big 12 versus FCS preview. Now, back in the day, I used to stack these up as like most likely to pull off an upset because there was a run in the Big 12 from 2013 through 2018 where an FCS team beat a Big 12 team every single year. Luckily, that streak has come to an end, and we haven't seen that happen for a while. But it is something I like to preview. And so joining us today, it's the only person I would go to if I want to talk FCS football. That is SamHerder of Hero Sports. Sam, welcome back to the pod, man.
Hey, thanks for having me back on.
Absolutely. Seriously, though, like when it comes to FCS football, you do an incredible job. Hero Sports does a great job. It's a pleasure to have you on again.
Yeah, I appreciate the kind words. And yeah, these matchups are interesting to talk about. Not necessarily, like you said, these might not be any upsets on this year's list, but it is interesting to talk about these matchups and the whole FCS versus Power Five debate. Should it happen? Shouldn't happen? Should these games be scheduled? That's been heated up quite a bit in the last year, and so just always interesting to talk about.
I'm not going to argue with anybody who doesn't want to watch Power Five versus FCS games. I understand why they exist. I'm perfectly fine with them existing. I get it. I'm not going to argue against them. People want to schedule them, go for it. Like I noted, the Big 12 is the only Power Five conference without a loss to an FCS team since 2019. Going to hang our hats on that one. Not the SEC, not the Big 10, not the Pac 10, 12, whatever, not the ACC. The Big 12 has not had one. But that was an interesting run. 2013, you had Iowa State and Kansas State both losing. 2014, Iowa State. 2015, Kansas. 2016, Iowa State. You notice some repetition here. 2017, Baylor. And 2018, Kansas. A lot of North Dakota State, Northern Iowa, folks. Why? I will never understand why anybody in their right mind scheduled North Dakota State as a Power 5 team. Why would you do that to yourself?
Yeah, I mean, there was a period of years too where NDSU went multiple years without playing a Power Five team, and then last year it was Arizona, a close game, but Arizona ended up winning, and it seemed like some Power Fives were saying, well, let's give NDSU a few years, they're going to cool off, they won't be as good, let's schedule them in the future, and then Arizona had a really close game. I believe Colorado is coming up soon next year, and then Oregon is down the road as well. They were supposed to play in 2020, but that got pushed back to a later year because of COVID. And that game, you would have Dylan Radins, like multiple NFL draft picks. That game in 2020 would have been a fantastic game that we won't be seeing now until a few years down the road.
Yeah, that one was people were talking about that game a lot in the offseason. That's something to keep an eye on. Well, we are here today to kind of preview the Big 12 versus FCS games for this coming season. There are 11 such games, and we're going to go in kind of a reverse order of least interesting to most interesting. Interesting can be a number of different things, whether you think it'll be a close game, or there's something about this matchup that's intriguing. So both Sam and I have ranked our order. I've got some notes so we can discuss these. Sam, let's just start at number 11. Which game is the one that you are, even as an FCS fan, least interested in paying attention to?
Yeah, I'm going to go 11 and 10 here just because I kind of want to combine these two, if that's okay. That's Baylor versus Long Island, then also West Virginia versus Duquesne. Two FCS programs from the NEC, probably the second worst conference in the FCS. And a lot of people talk, when we're talking about FBS versus FCS, it's the 85 versus 63 scholarships. Well, the NEC has even less scholarships than that. I don't even know the exact number. It might be in the 40s as far as scholarships that the NEC offers. And so these are the bottom two games for me as far as intrigue.
Yeah, I agree with you. I tried to put some notes together for this on each of these teams. The only three things I have for Duquesne, for West Virginia versus Duquesne, which is why I have an 11th. This team went 4-7 last year. West Virginia is 4-3-1 all time versus the Dukes. The last meeting was 1935. That's it. There was nothing of note for Duquesne worth even putting down as like hey, that's fun. I got nothing. Long Island, return 5 2022 Northeastern Conference first teamers. This is the first time these two teams have ever met. Long Island went 4-7 last year, but they ended the season on a 4-game win streak. I'm not sure you can give this full credit, but the streak just happened to coincide with the team switching starting quarterbacks to freshman Lucas Stanzani. He completed 63% of his passes for 1,005 yards, 12 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions during that 4-game winning streak. He will be the expected starter this year, so I thought that was at least something interesting of note. I don't expect this to be a game, though.
Yep, I agree.
Okay, number 9.
I did BYU, Southern Utah. Southern Utah's they left one of the better FCS conferences a few years ago in the Big Sky. They've now joined, they joined the WAC, which combined with the ASUN, which is now the ASUN WAC, but has now rebranded to the United Athletic Conference in the UAC. They kind of made storylines last December that they want to jump up as a whole to the FBS, which us in the FCS are basically saying, yeah, that's probably not going to happen. But anyway, Southern Utah is not, they're a below average team in the United Athletic Conference. I do like a quarterback, Justin Miller. He's a multi-year starter, so he's a solid player, but, SUU, it just isn't, necessarily on the FCS top 25 radar. And so I don't expect this to be a very close game.
I'll add to that. You mentioned Justin Miller. He was first team WAC quarterback last year. They have 2 other first teamers coming back as well, 5 and 6 last season. This will be the second time BYU and Southern Utah have faced off. BYU is 1-0 all time. I have them at 8. 9 for me was TCU versus Nichols. Nichols was 3-8 last year. It's the first time they've ever met, and they return offensive lineman Evan Russell, who was a first team All-Southland Conference last year. That's all I got. There's nothing else about Nichols. I was like, okay, cool. This should not be a game. So
yeah, and that was my number 8 ranking there. Nichols really took a giant step down last year. They lost their star quarterback Lindsey Scott Jr. to Incarnate Word, and Scott led UIW to last year's semifinals. And without him, Nichols, who wants to be a run first team, and you mentioned Evan, he's a really good offensive lineman for Nichols, multi-year starter, and so they want to be a run first team, but they just didn't have the horses last year, and they went from a team that we consistently saw in the playoffs to, I don't know what the record was last year, but it wasn't very good. And so I don't especially expect Nichols to have a bounce back year either.
Yeah, Nichols was 3-8 last year. So, Hey, the game is going to be played. Okay, number 7. What do you got here?
Yeah, I have Texas Tech taking on Tarleton State. Tarleton I think they're in their 3rd or 4th year now as a transition team, transitioning to the FCS from Division II. The team they've competed decently. The thing that's interesting about Tarleton is honestly less about, the team specifically, but more about the program as a whole, because when you look at the remaining teams in the FCS and who's being most aggressive toward wanting to go to the FBS, that top team is probably Tarleton State. They have not been shy about saying, hey, we want to go FBS. We think we're going to be FBS ready, even though they're not even FCS playoff eligible just yet. They have a lot of resources. The stadium upgrade is now, I believe, like 30,000 seats, which in the FCS, that's a pretty good size stadium. And so, I don't expect Tarleton to be a top team. Like, they're also a part of the United Athletic Conference. I don't expect them to be a top team. They'll be a middling team. So will this be a close game? Probably not. But it is kind of a barometer for Tarleton State to see how close, they are to, being FBS ready. And so I think that is what makes this game more intriguing rather than, the team itself. It's more about the overall program of Tarleton and where they want to be in 4 or 5 years. Yeah,
Tarleton got stomped by TCU last year, so now they're going to face off against another Texas team from the Big 12. They do return 2022 WAC Newcomer of the Year quarterback Bo Allen, who threw for 2,836 yards, 23 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions, as well as 5 other first-teamers from last year. Went 6-5, no shocker, first ever meeting with Texas Tech, because, of course, they've only been FCS for a few years. No, I do think it's interesting. Look, Conference USA, they're going to get to 10 teams in 2024. Wouldn't be shocked to see a third Texas team join that conference when it looks to inevitably expand, as everything seems to do. I agree there at number 7. Number 6, I think we probably have the same answer here as well. UCF versus Villanova.
Yep, I have that matchup for my number 6. Villanova, they are an FCS blue blood. They've consistently been in the playoffs. They did take a step back last year. I want to say preseason last year at this time, Villanova was right around the top 10, and they ended up barely missing the playoffs. They did beat Delaware in the final week of the regular season, and Delaware was a playoff team last year. Villanova does bring back a decent amount of their players, and so I expect them to be probably better than what they were last year. Kind of a black and blue type physical program. They want to be able to run the ball. They play tough, hard nosed defense, disciplined defense. But is this going to be a close game? I don't think it's going to be an absolute, beat down by any means. I think Villanova could compete decently, but yeah, it's kind of a middling matchup as far as these matchups we're talking about.
You mentioned returners for Villanova. Jaron Hayek, if I'm pronouncing that right, was the team's lead receiver. He was All Colonial Athletic Association first teamer. 36 passes for 810 yards. It's 22 and a half yards per reception. Dude caught some deep passes and 8 touchdowns. So if you're a UCF fan, if he goes long and gets the deep one, like, don't be shocked. That's what this guy does. It's really interesting. Yeah, UCF is 1-0 all time against the Wildcats. They went 6-5, as you mentioned, kind of a backwards year for them. I know that you wrote for Hero, but Athlon also has their FCS rankings, and this was among their teams to watch just outside of their top 25. So I do think that one is at least an interesting one. That is at least the most of week 3. We've got 3 of the Big 12 FCS matchups in week 3. Texas Tech versus Tarleton, UCF Villanova, and then that Baylor Long Island game. So definitely the most interesting of the week 3 FCS games. Okay. I think our top 5 are the same in maybe a differing order. So who do you have as number 5?
Yeah, my number 5, excuse me, is Kansas taking on Missouri State. I think this could be a three-quarter game that goes into the fourth quarter. Missouri State last year was highly ranked. They were top 5, top 8 FCS program last year at this time, and they look like, they did look like a top 5 program at the start of the year, and they were actually beating, I believe it was Arkansas for.
Yep.
Yeah, that game went into the fourth quarter and Mo State was up and everyone was saying, all right, Missouri State, they're a legit FCS title contender. The Bears end up losing and then things just kind of unraveled for there. And the problem with Missouri State last year is they had so many returning starters, but they also added in like 15 FBS transfers and things just didn't mesh at all. And their season just kind of went on a steep decline after that Arkansas game. And this year, new head coach, a young head coach in Ryan Beard, once again, not bringing in as many FBS transfers, but they're close to around 10 FBS transfers coming in. They did lose a handful of guys as well to the transfer portal that ended up going to the FBS. And so just a pretty big roster overhaul, honestly, for Missouri State. They do have some returners coming back, but just a kind of an unknown right now in the FCS. I don't think they're going to get a whole lot of top 25 love, but we've seen teams like Stanford last year that bring in a lot of FBS transfers and things click, and they end up being really good. And so this is one game I think that might not be circled on a lot of people's radars, but I think Missouri State could, this could be like a 21-21 ball game going into the fourth.
Like, again, Kansas fans don't want to hear this. This is not us picking Kansas to lose. Like, this is a whole new Kansas program, but it is at least interesting. Obviously, Ryan Beard, as you mentioned, he was the DC for the last 3 years under Bobby Petrino, who's now the offensive coordinator for Texas A&M. Beard is 33 years old. He's a 33-year-old head college football coach, which is crazy. Kansas is 2-0 all time against the Bears. This is a Friday night game of week 1. It's technically the second Big 12 game of the season to kick off. It'll kick off an hour later than UCF Kent State. So nice early opportunity to catch Kansas against Missouri State. All right. I agree at number 5 there. Number 4, where are you at?
I have K-State versus SEMO, Southeast Missouri State. I really like SEMO this year. I think they can make some noise in the FCS playoffs, potentially maybe a quarterfinal type team. Really good passing attack, some big body wide receivers. Geno Hess is a multi-time All-American for them at running back. Bryce Norman is a name to know on the defensive side of the football. Just a lot of good players all over the field for for SEMO. I know K-State obviously coached by Chris Kleiman, former FCS head coach, and so I highly doubt K-State is going to overlook any FCS program, but SEMO does have talent to make this, again, not a win, but maybe a game that's closer, closer than maybe K-State fans expect for 2.5 to 3 quarters.
Look, it's the highest ranked in the preseason of any FCS team Big 12 teams will face, which seems to be something Kansas State does a lot. You guys have them at preseason number 11. Athlon has them at preseason number 9. They went 9-3 last year. You mentioned Hess among multiple first teamers returning from last year of Ohio Valley all conference. They also bring back the winner of last year's Remington Award for the top center in the FCS, Zach Geig. So, I think there is talent here for SEMO. I think this should be an interesting game for at least maybe a quarter. Kansas State's going to win this game, with the expectations for Kansas State. But we've seen teams have weird games against FCS opponents. We've seen teams in week 1 or week 2. It happens all the time. So, it could be at least interesting for a quarter. But I think this is at least one where Kansas State always likes to see good FCS teams. It's all right, guys. Mm-hmm. I don't know what's going on there, but it is certainly an interesting one. You've got it at number 4. I do as well. What do you have at number 3?
Yeah, Oklahoma State versus Central Arkansas. UCA is interesting because they're not in my top 25, but they probably fall under my under the radar teams, because the more I look at Central Arkansas, I did top 25 returning players by position in the FCS. And Central Arkansas, when I went back and looked at all the teams that had the most players selected, Central Arkansas had, I can't remember the specific amount, but they probably had the 3rd or 4th most players in those top 25 positional rankings. And they've been a pretty solid F program. They did not make the playoffs last year, but you go back 4 or 5 years, they've always been in the playoff mix. I think they're going to have a really good balance of running and passing offensively. They have an experienced quarterback in Will McElvain, a couple of really good running backs. Offensive line in the trenches. These matchups like this, usually in the trenches, the Power 5 team is just going to overwhelm after a while. But, I think Central Arkansas, especially their passing attack, might hit on some big plays, and, maybe it's 14-14 at some point in the second quarter, and things get a little interesting. People pay attention to this game, and then, things just kind of unravel for UCA in the second half. But I do think this is intriguing, just because you just look at the individual athletes that UCA has, and I think some of those guys, could have some big games.
You guys, like you said, you have them kind of as a team to watch. Athlon had them preseason number 22. It's surprising for as much talent as this team seems to have at the SCS level. They went 5-6 last year, but they bring back the David Walker, who's a defensive lineman for there, was the defensive player of the year and all conference. They bring back 2022 freshman of the year, all conference, and Will Diggins. Darius Hale, 2-time all conference running back. They bring a bunch of guys back who seem to be very talented. I actually have this as number 2, and part of that is you've got an Oklahoma State team, and I'm not picking Central Arkansas to pull off this upset, but we've seen OSU struggle with their early non-conference games. We've seen them struggle against some FCS teams the last couple of years because they just have trouble getting out of the gate. You're breaking in a new quarterback. You're breaking in a roster that sees a ton of turnover from the portal. You've got a new first-time defensive coordinator. This is an OSU team that just has a lot of questions with the amount of turnover to the roster and obviously a new DC. And they're changing their offensive philosophy a bit to go more 2 tight end sets. So I have this one number 2 because I'm very interested in this game. Number 3 for me, I'm gonna bet we have the same number 1, so I'm betting this is number 2. Is Cincinnati versus Eastern Kentucky. Is an Eastern Kentucky team went 7-5 last year. They had one of the FCS over FBS wins. They beat Bowling Green. You guys have them as the number 21 preseason ranked FCS team. Their redshirt senior quarterback, Parker McKinney, who was the ASUN Offensive Player of the Year and first team quarterback last year, and his top receiver, Jaden Smith, are both back. Cincinnati, similarly, brand new coaching staff. I think this Cincinnati's defense still has a ton of talent on its roster, but whole new coaching staff. Not sure what to expect here, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I have this at number 2 just because or number 3. I think it's an interesting one, though. I really do.
I do as well, and this is my number 2 for me. And the name you mentioned, Parker McKinney, that's the main reason why I think this is such an intriguing game, because he can sling it. He's a 6-year senior. He's putting up monster numbers. And I think, just when you see a player of his caliber, yeah, when he throws for 400 yards and 500 yards versus FCS opponents, that's cool and all, but what can he do against, FBS opponents? And he played really well all of last year. EKU played 2 FBS opponents, and they had a close loss in one, and then you mentioned the Bowling Green win, which was a 7 overtime thriller, just a crazy game. And so I think this is intriguing for me because I do think McKinney, he has, I don't know if he'll be an NFL draft pick, but he might be an undrafted free agent type of talent. And the first film that people, that scouts and teams pop in is, okay, what did you do against FBS opponents? And so I just have a feeling that McKinney, he's not going to absolutely torch Cincy, but I think he might get, 250 to 300 passing yards in this one, and kind of show how good he is.
Definitely an interesting game. And that one is in week 1 as well. All right. So we both have the same number 1. I don't think this should be surprising to anybody. It is Iowa State versus Northern Iowa. I'll just leave with this. Iowa State is 26-6-3 all time against UNI. 3 of those losses have come since 2007. They lost 2014 or 24-13 in 2007. They lost 20-20 in 2013. They lost 25-20 in 2016. And let me remind you, the last 2 meetings, Iowa State won 16-10 in 2021, 29-26 in 3 overtimes in 2019. Like, this is a series that is consistently close. Iowa State plays this team all the time. It's a huge game for UNI when they get to play it. Like, it's always earlier in the season. Campbell doesn't ever show out for this game. It is always a close and interesting game to watch.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a close one. I really do. And it seems like Northern Iowa is either playing Iowa State or Iowa every other year. And I think 2025 or 2026, Northern Iowa is playing both. They're playing both Iowa State and Iowa, which is interesting from an FCS perspective, because you don't want to. Northern Iowa is always 6-5 or 7-4 and right on that playoff bubble. And so if you schedule 2 Power 5 teams, that's most likely going to be 2 losses, and you're kind of scheduling yourself out of the playoff mix. But Northern Iowa always schedules tough in the non-conference. And, I think this can be a close game because Theo Day, the quarterback for Northern Iowa, he's been there for a few years, Michigan State transfer, big guy, cannon of an arm. I know Northern Iowa's head coach, Coach Farley, he created some online social media buzz between Iowa and Iowa State fans because he said they have the best quarterback in the state. And he might be right. I mean, Theo Day could be an NFL draft pick. He is that good. And he's a senior this year. So Northern Iowa is going to have a really explosive offense. It was interesting last year that Northern Iowa's offense was really good last year, but their defense was really bad. Usually it's the opposite. And their defensive coordinator left last year for 1 year to go to the FBS. Now he's back. And so were their struggles only because of their defensive coordinator, or was it talent? Who knows? But with the DC back, if Coach Johnson can get that defense playing like they usually were, coupled with the explosive offense, I think Northern Iowa has potential to be a top 10 team in the FCS. And like you said, they usually play Iowa State close. And so I think this can be a close game. I'm not calling an upset, but if I had to, I think this is going to be if this was a 10-point spread, I would take Northern Iowa to cover. I would say that.
Yeah, look, I agree. Again, not calling this an upset. Not going to do that. Even despite the struggles that Iowa State had last year, they've got a new offensive coordinator. You've lost a bunch of key guys from the offensive and defensive side of the ball. Not sure what to expect from Iowa State. It's week 1. Iowa State just hired away UNI's offensive line coach, Ryan Clanton, this offseason. So he's now in Ames. He's produced some really, really good offensive lines at the FCS level and sent a couple guys to the NFL while he was there. You guys, both Hero and Athlon, have UNI just outside their preseason top 25s or as a team to watch. This is number 1 because it is the most interesting. It has the best chance, I think, of being a close game. And if there was going to be a please pick one Big 12 FCS upset, I think this is the one we would both easily circle. If nothing else, for the history of these 2 teams playing incredibly close games, much to the frustration of Iowa State fans.
Yeah, and it always, even when Northern Iowa hasn't even had their strongest of seasons, they've always seem like they've had this 1-point game versus Iowa State, and then Northern Iowa ends up going 6-5. And so no matter how good or quote unquote bad, they're never bad, but sometimes they're below average. It just seems like it's just a really tightly contested game. And I do think Northern Iowa is going to be good this year. I know I have them. We have them outside of our top 25. That's mostly because of the kind of defensive questions they have. But if they can get that unit turned around, their offense is going to be able to score points on anyone. And I think they can, they could score. I mean, they're not going to put a 40 or 50 burger on Iowa State, but I mean, they're also not going to be held to 10 points. And so just a really intriguing game. And again, I mentioned with Parker McKinney about NFL draft and tape and how important it is. This is a huge game for Theo Day to say that, yeah, he is a 5th, 6th, 7th round draft pick. And I do think Theo Day is going to have a really good game here at quarterback for Northern Iowa.
The idea of Iowa fans getting mad about some other team having a better offensive player than them
Yeah,
really
right.
is good. How dare you say someone else has a better quarterback? Like, everybody else has a better quarter. Like you don't get to make any complaints about someone judging your offense. Iowa win a game with more than like 6 points, and we'll talk about that. Sam, as always, it's an absolute pleasure. I look forward to these games for some strange, sick reason, because I think we all love a good FCS over FBS or worse Power 5 game. It's just one of those things that it's kind of like we're just gonna keep an eye out for. Kind of fun to poke at a team when that happens. Glad it hasn't happened to a Big 12 team in a while, and I hope the streak continues. But for everybody who wants to learn more about the FCS season, North Dakota State's not the only good team in the FCS. Where can they check out all the work you do covering FCS football, man?
Yeah, our website is herosports.com, and then I'm on Twitter at SamHerder FCS. And so you can find, all of our FCS coverage. We don't do any Power 5 football covers, but we do some FBS Group of 5 coverage. And so any G5 football fans out there, you can also find G5 coverage on herosports.com.
Yeah, you guys, I love what you guys do there at Hero. I think it's super neat. It's good to see that there is some outlets covering those that just don't get the attention. And I understand that we can, I don't care. Like, I love college football. And so I love seeing all college football get some attention. There's great stories to be told everywhere. And you guys do a great job of it at FCS and G5 level. So Sam, appreciate it, man. Enjoy the season. And I hope you can see an upset, just not in the Big 12.
Yeah, elsewhere we'll probably see some, but yeah, this list of FCS versus Big 12, probably not this year.
Okay, before I let you go, then I've teed this up. Is there a FCS versus P5 upset that you kind of have, or two that you kind of have circled as this is a game to keep an eye on?
Yeah, that so I did my top 10 list. And I'm pulling it up right now. As far as Power 5, I'm looking at my top 10. I'm seeing a lot of G5, G5, G5. All right, there is one Power 5 on my top 10. The rest are G5. That's William & Mary at Virginia is my most likely FCS over Power 5 upset. It's number 9 for me as far as overall FCS over FBS, most likely. But yeah, this one is the only Power 5 FCS over FBS upset that I have on my top 10 list. And so that is one to keep an eye on for.
All right. If you got a few bucks, William & Mary. There we go. Sam, appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.